Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hydragons Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Archon's Adversaries, the Titandeath Jungle. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Indiga. We've had quite a bit of time, so let's go over where things stand with this last video in the campaign. Our lovely Indigan prefects are in a scramble. They're moving with all speed towards the capital city, attempting by all means possible to move their SMS, massive mobile mining and survival structures, back towards a defensible position. While the central city of Indiga is not particularly massive, it is certainly no hive city, is it at least more urbanized and defensive than trying to fight out of the SMSs out in the jungle. Luckily for them, they've had the opportunity with all of these enemies to get quite a few back to the city over the last couple of weeks. Only 6 remain in the field, and they are going to be ordered back in rapid order. 2 of them are engaged down south with Mardrug and his orcs, and then the other 4 were the ones stuck at the northern pass last time, and they are now on the run from various groups of Tyrannid monsters. On the side of Imperial governance, our lovely and quite pressed at this point Inquisitor Albrecht and the Principa have been having severe talks, let's say. The governor's actively pressing the Inquisitor, pressuring him in all possible senses, both verbal and administrative, by restricting the airspace and continuing active updates to the Imperium against the Inquisitor's wishes. Now, while generally the Inquisition have the ability to go through any amount of red tape, in this case Albrecht has quite literally brought doom upon a planet that he should be helping out. Now that that's a pretty much well-known fact to the governor, he's become considerably less pliable. And while he can't simply tell the Inquisitor to go fuck himself or shoot him in the back of the head, he absolutely can make communicating in a slimy way with the Imperium much, much harder. For example, in this case, Albrecht would much prefer that the Astropaths continue to complain about the Orcs and the Tyrannids with no mention of the Eldar, hoping that they will be able to see off the Eldari without any repercussions for his actions of kidnapping the Eldar Farseer, getting back to him. The Principal Planetary Governor is continuing to give accurate updates, rather than the doctored version that Albrecht might prefer. To put it simply, it is a very tense internal situation, and both sides of the autocratic and the, shall we say, local version of imperial governance are very close to being at each other's throats over who is at fault in this situation, and of course, who is in charge on the world of Indiga. While they are having their little tiffs politically, their enemies are having a wonderful time. Specifically, the Tyrannids are probably having the best time. The Tyrannid Leviathan Microsplinter, originally designed for the destruction of the Orcs, is now marauding across the northern continent. They've broken up into several aggressive groups and are hunting the SMSs who have been stuck at the pass, in addition to now finding, detecting, and menacing the Eldar. Now, why the humans makes plenty of sense, because of course they are the largest source of biomass in the nearby area that isn't also quite dangerous. As we know, Indiga is home to many violent creatures, but the Tyranids know that humans are relatively delicious and quite easy to get a hold of once you knock out one of the SMSs. They also know that the guards are not really in a position to resist them, at least not effectively. The reason that they've gone after the Eldar, on the other hand, is because they have a strong psychic signature. Remember well that this microsplinter was designed to track down any scent or any sense of the Orcish Wa, and that means that they are drawn to such strong psychic nexi, essentially, as the Eldar dragon ship, which is going to be a primary target for them during this video. Marjog's Blood Axes, the few of them that currently remain, are preparing a trump card, intending to break up the skirmishing encirclement that the 3 and 4 SMS group of Indigan Prefix have set up, and to break out of what is likely to be a very, very difficult situation for them. They're stuck on the low ground, they're defending their busted ship, and their numbers are likely not sufficient to overcome the 2 or so thousand guardsmen that have been brought down to deal with them. So, Marjog is going to have to pull out all the stops if he wants to break this encirclement. Finally, we get to Alytok. Alytok's forces have been having a rough time, but they do have a plan. They're splitting up into 3 groups because they have 3 primary objectives. One is very simple. They need to defend and repair the dragon ship. If they intend to get off of this planet, they need every single Bonesinger working specifically on getting the dragon ship back into orbit. This is a difficult task. Not only did it suffer damage from being hooked onto by the Tyrannid microsplinter ship, but also coming down into orbit and landing in the mountains, it has suffered significant structural damage, and has not had a significant period of time in which to regenerate naturally. Rather, it is having to be done very quickly and relatively sloppily. This means 2 things. One, everyone who is on the dragon ship from Craftworld Alytok is theoretically in danger while the dragon ship is not active. In addition, it means that the dragon ship lies right directly in the path of the fleeing SMSs, which of course the Eldar know is going to draw the Tyrannids. So one group is going to have to defend and repair the dragon ship. One is likely going to have to interfere with those SMSs, trying to turn them away or get rid of the Tyrannids following them. And then the final group is the one that has hijacked SMS number 5 and is bringing it down south, preparing to attack the Imperial defenses to try and get back their Farseer. Now, as you can see here, we've made some quick updates to the maps. The Tyranids have now fully gestated. They're breaking up, eating as they go, and following their 3 large Synapse Biotitans towards the mountains, chasing the SMSs as they tortuously slowly try and make it through this northern gap. The Eldar, of course, have gathered themselves, and they're transiting the vulnerable Eldar, those civilians and various other folks who aren't going to be useful in either repairing the ship or an active running battle, down with SMS number 5 to the south towards the Imperial defenses. The goal essentially being that they can set up a much more secure defensive perimeter, and then from there launch an attack upon the Imperials in order to get their Farseer back. The Prefects, now facing 3 deadly Xenos forces on 3 different fronts, are suffering a complete withdrawal. The only forces that are currently allowed in the field by permission are the ones actively defending SMSs. All of the other structures have retreated to the capital city and are setting up a 2-sided defense, one facing the south and a much more significant one facing north. As mentioned, while Indiga's central city is relatively large and sprawling, mostly focused upon processing of raw materials into finished materials to be sent off-world, in addition to some limited industry, it is very much a wide city rather than a tall city, and it is studded with various imperial megafab structures that don't lend themselves to a massive defensive wall. So many of these defenses are having to be put up very quickly, or function around existing defenses that keep out megafauna, such as large networks of fences, metal gratings, and various smaller pillboxes that are designed to resist things like megaraptors, or massive birds, or enormous snake-like creatures, or etc., various massive Xenos. However, there is one force that is going on the offensive. The troops, the 2 various companies that are facing off against Marjog's orcs, began their offensive, began their attack on our last video, and will be continuing it in this one, before receiving the order to retreat and head back northward. Their hope is to essentially break the back of the Orcish resistance and prevent them from having any organized pushes that might compromise the defense in the north. So, starting off first, we have to take a look at the Imperial sacrifice at the pass. SMS 9 and 10 are the very last in that line that are going to get the opportunity to go through the pass. The pass is thin, it is also very difficult terrain, and there is no easy way around it to the north. That means that every single SMS needs to pass through it one at a time, and even at their absolute maximum speed, which is limited in these tight quarters, it's going to take them at least a couple days to transit through in their entirety. The column doesn't have that long. So, SMS 9 and 10 empty the entire hull of every single individual except for the guardsmen aboard. Several other guardsmen choose to stay behind, making the total number of troops around 3,000, and the two SMSs with their inbuilt defenses, mostly these are las cannons, and they physically block the pass. The massive bulldozers that are on the front of each SMS are turned upon the massive boulders and the rock faces to either side of the tight passageway, and they're used to collapse the entire pass, basically cementing both supersized mining structures in place and providing a physical barrier through which the Tyranids will have to clamber and climb over very difficult terrain, while the Imperials can resist them. This is essentially suicide. The guardsmen are facing only one of the three Tyranid groups, not that they know that, but it's still a full-on Bio-Titan facing off against Imperial guardsmen numbering about 3,000, a few light anti-tank vehicles, and the SMSs, which are completely immobilized. It's a massacre. Dozens of Carnifexes, hundreds of Gaunts, and the massive Acid Titan essentially crush these two SMSs. The one thing that they do achieve is that they manage to slow down that one spearhead. The guardsmen are mostly defending from within the SMS. It gives them some amount of cover, especially from the acid, but once a couple of direct hits are received by the SMSs, their decks start to crumble and they very rapidly begin to collapse in on themselves. While these things are rather large and tough, they're not really designed for vertical impact. So once one of the Bio-Titans is able to step on top of it, and of course once the Carnifexes are able to get close to it, they're able to rapidly disassemble it, and then the Gaunts can proceed through the halls of the SMS itself and massacre most of the troops inside. The damage to that force is fairly significant, at least in terms of Carnifexes and Gaunts. They are cut down by about half, meaning that there's probably about 12 or so Carnifexes left, and less than 300 Gaunts in total. However, almost none of the weapons can really deal with the giant Bio-Titan. These Bio-Titans are particularly deadly because they are modified. They are synapse creatures. They're also designed to be far more defensive. Because they are designed to deal with orcs who might have particularly large weapons, one of the major modifications to them, on top of being synapse, is that their psychic shielding has been increased in power, and their regeneration has been improved. That means for all of the las cannon firepower and all of the heavyweight infantry weapons brought against this Bio-Titan in the north, it simply isn't enough to first penetrate the shields, and then to deal appreciable damage that will not be regenerated by the time that the Acid Titan gets another fight in. In addition to that, while the Prefects are relatively well armored, there is a difference between the mechanized troops and the lighter troops, especially the ones on the defensive. Those lighter troops are often not equipped to deal with the ambient acid damage that these Bio-Titans are able to dish out, and while they just pass by in some cases, the rain of acidic liquid that takes over the air is going to kill almost as many troops as their primary acid weapons are, simply because it provides an ambient damage source that's going to kill off a lot of guardsmen. Not to mention, if there had been any civilians left behind, it likely would have been an even worse death toll for them. The Imperial Sacrifice does, however, buy some time for the other SMSs to get through the pass and to turn southward. As they do so, the other two Tyranid spearheads also head south, heading through the mountains, slowly traveling towards the psychic signature of the Eldar, but also to cut off the remaining SMSs. Remember, the Bio-Titans are the synapse creatures here. They are the ones directing the other Tyranid creatures, which means that their primary goal, find and eliminate the largest sources of biomass and psychic energy, basically override any other local concerns. So if a Gaunt happens to find something tasty in the jungle, the Bio-Titans can pretty much force them to ignore it and push them on in the hunt. This does mean that essentially the Tyranids are going to be feeding as possible here rather than feeding as needed. It's going to result in a lot of those smaller creatures either dying of starvation or beginning to get lost and disoriented due to hunger and exhaustion over the couple of days that it's going to take them to travel. That does not apply, however, to the Carnifexes, who have had plenty of time to devour the dead and also to eat some of their smaller cousins. Not to mention eat all the humans that they found. The Eldar, basically observing this sacrifice via the air, and then furthermore seeing the transit of the Bio-Titans, which the SMSs are not aware of, they decide to split up into the pre-aforementioned groups, and we have a true fight on our hands here. This is going to be referred to as the Titandeath Jungle battles. In this conflict, we have 3 or 4 god machines at a time. On the Eldar side of things, this is their mobile force, the force that they've sent both to corral and curtail the movement of the SMSs, forcing them wide of the dragon ship, which really can be done without any actual force. All they need to do is show up with this force, and the SMSs will automatically change direction, which is done fairly quickly because the Eldar move very swiftly to try and redirect them first before they deal with the Tyranids, who are now targeting them. This force consists of 4 Raptor jet bikes. These jet bikes include a sniper on the rear of each vehicle and the standard jet bike weaponry. 1 Transit Falcon. This is a heavily modified Falcon designed for Alytox Farseers. Rather than having a primary and secondary weapon, it only has a secondary weapon, and then it has a large open cab designed to carry a large squad of about 15 aspect warriors along with the Farseer, basically his personal bodyguards, and then his psychic might acting as its primary weapon, so to speak. 2 Warwalkers in addition to that. Essentially, while the Raptor jet bikes are the scout for the entire force, the Warwalkers are the scouts and defenders for that primary command vehicle, the Transit Falcon. Then, finally, we have the Phantom Titan. The Phantom Titan is a Lytox trump card. It is the biggest thing. It is the thing that they brought to essentially make this rescue mission no longer be a fight. This was not ever meant to be an even struggle. It wasn't even really meant to be a skirmish. It was essentially meant to be a show of force. Do not steal an Eldar Farseer ever again. And if any other Imperials had heard of such a thing, they probably would have gotten the message. Unfortunately for the Eldar, now this Phantom Titan is being put into a conflict zone that it never expected to go into. It is equipped, as a standard Phantom Titan layout would be, with a Vibro Cannon, which is a massive sonic weapon capable of crushing the ground within a short distance of the vehicle, causing massive furrows in the ground through sonic shockwaves, and killing many, many different types of light, medium, and heavy creatures, depending upon the range. It does have a slight fall off, but at close range it's devastating even to very heavy armor. It also has another very classic Phantom Titan weapon, a Pulsar Lance. The Pulsar Lance is essentially a very large version of the Star Lance, essentially, or a relatively similar concept. It fires several very, very high-strength beams, similar to those of a large las cannon. Finally, on its shoulder mount, it has a set of mounted missiles. These are the standard Eldar missiles, a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive, usually designated as high-explosive or plasma warheads. In this case, it is the same, but it is mostly weighted towards plasma warheads, because the goal was essentially to deal with Imperial structures, while the Vibro Cannon and the Pulsar are effective at dealing with heavy enemy tanks and with large targets of opportunity with the Pulsar. The mounted missiles were designed to essentially reduce enemy defenses. The name of this Phantom Titan is Tel Cilia Thalarn, or the Silver Star Bastion. I'll be referring to it either as the Bastion or the Silver Star throughout this battle. Now, the Silver Star is one of a few Titans available to a Lytok. A Lytok being such an odd craft world in general, they don't have as many of these super heavy assets, whereas they rely very heavily upon more specialized assets. For example, their Pathfinders, as opposed to many other craft worlds focusing on different types of Aspect Warriors. Now, a Lytok in this case is bringing along Aspect Warriors, specifically in the Transit Falcon. There are a group of Swooping Hawks, and then a smaller group of Striking Scorpions, personal guards, of course, but Tel Cilia Thalarn, the Silver Star Bastion, is very much a pinnacle jewel. And specifically because of how dangerous and deadly its weapons are, it is basically permitted to act as a personal grudge match weapon. If it needs to be used as an overmatch, if it needs to be used as a finishing move, essentially, or in this case, as a show of force, as a message deliverer, it is a primary thing. It is also a very flashy Titan. In terms of colors, it is, as it's described, beautifully silvered, and while it's hollow field, it makes it very, very difficult to see for enemies. It is still a breathtaking sight when those fields are actually not in active use. For the Tyranids, on the other hand, they're split up into 3 groups of varying different compositions, so take these numbers with a grain of salt. In each group, there are about a dozen Carnifexes. Now, Carnifexes, again, they're large, they're very heavily armored, they can lope along at a decent pace, but their biggest advantage is just how darn tough they are and how hard they are to knock out of a fight. They have the essential toughness of something like a heavy tank. Now, for terms of gaunts, and this also will include termagants, hormagaunts, smaller weapon beasts, and also melee base, each group has about 500. That group that went north and got ravaged by the sacrificial attempts of the guardsmen to hold the pass has about 300, and they've lost a few of their excess Carnifexes. The big center point for these Tyranid groups, however, as you might expect, are those Synapse Biotitans. The Biotitans are modified as follows. Each of them, rather than having a single sharp-tipped toe foot, they have 4 toed feet, essentially with 4 grabbing talons or claws. The point of this is not only to give them a little bit more brawling ability, so rather than a single stabbing motion with the claw, they have the ability to grab, rip, or to pierce, puncture, and tear at a target, kind of like a crab claw instead of something like a knife. But also, in this rocky terrain with its jungles, its unevenness, and with its soft, loamy soil, the 4-toed feet give them a massive stability advantage. And it gives them the ability to get over things like mountaintops and high ridges without much difficulty. They can grab, grip, and pull themselves up with these extremely long limbs, which would be much harder if they were just a single spike. Finally, they have their very powerful psychic presence. In this case, it is buffing their shields, their psychic fields, and their regeneration. Now, while the psychic field of a Biotitan is not anywhere near the level of a Void Shield, especially a layered Void Shield, it is still able to resist significant damage, especially diffuse damage, kind of similar in a way to like the soap bubble shields that we see with, say, Knights, or with refractor fields, or ion fields, or things of that nature. While it is not a one-to-one dichotomy, it is notable that these ones are relatively powerful. So rather than acting as like a disposable shield like they normally would be on a Biotitan, you know, they get knocked out by something heavy and big and it saves the Titan's life and then they're without a shield for a bit. In this case, they are able to take a little bit more punishment. Their psychic power also increases their regeneration very slightly. While the Biotitan itself is already capable of regenerating from major wounds, including losing limbs in some cases, these ones are just a little bit more. Specifically, they're designed to keep them alive for longer periods of time. Since these were made, essentially, ostensibly, to get rid of orcs, the idea was if you ever brought down one of these Biotitans by knocking off a limb or a leg, they're still able to fight, even if they are heavily crippled. So while it's regeneration may be the technical term, it's more accurate to say that they will get a longer death throes, and that this death throes will be far more violent than a standard Biotitans would be. In addition, their secondary weapons, or their primary ranged weapons, are very simple. They have two massive acid spewers, which are essentially a giant version of the Drool cannon. They are heavily acidic. They have a very limited range in terms of Titan weaponry, but they do have two of them. The other thing that they carry in addition to that on the smokestacks of their back are massive acidic gas projectors. These gas projectors are very, very dangerous because they provide them with a little bit of visual cover, but more importantly, once they close with an enemy, they do not have to actually shoot with the acid spewers or with their primary weapons of their feet in order to deal damage. All that they need to do in order to hurt other vehicles or to damage infantry units is their mere presence. And this again was designed with orcs in mind. The acidic gas gives you the ability to destroy the orcish mushroom hive mind. Essentially their breeding grounds would be scoured clean by this acidic gas, and in addition to that, creatures that were too small to be dealt with by the giant acid spewers could be destroyed by these biotitans relatively easily just by coming nearby to them. And so, with the sides outlined, we get to the Titandeath Jungle. The first encounter between Alytok's troops and the Tyranids is in the far north. As mentioned, Alytok intends to move the Imperial SMSs out of the way. They don't have the time or the ability to deal with them right now. So the Silver Star walks northward. It is the fastest vehicle here other than the jet bikes. It can travel massive distances at an incredibly high speed, and it can transfer over large difficult objects and terrain markers like mountains far more easily than the Warwalkers or the Transit Falcon. Now, the jet bikes, they are probably faster than the Silver Star, but they also have to deal with things like moving around mountains rather than just being able to fly directly over them. Or at least it's a little bit harder than it is for the Phantom Titan to just step over them, for example. This northern group essentially stands sentinel for a couple of minutes, letting the SMSs get a good lock on them, letting them know that they're there. They watch the SMSs change direction, knowing the Imperials are not going to suddenly stumble upon the damaged dragon ship. Then they turn to what was chasing them. The northern escort portion of the Silver Star's group basically decimate this one force of the Tyranids. The ones that were following through the northern pass, the ones that had already faced off against the Imperials, they've suffered some damage, they've had to travel over difficult terrain, their Carnifexes are lagging behind the Biotitan, the Gaunts are lagging behind them, and that leaves the Silver Star absolutely no problems in dealing with this group. Even though they're crossing over the mountains with their escorts, when they get into contact, it's the Biotitan first. Naturally, this means something very simple. The Silver Star opens up at extreme range. The Pulsar is deadly accurate, and it, as its first shot, generally against a Biotitan, would cripple or at least be able to penetrate the shields and deal damage. Now, with this case, with the much stronger Synapse Biotitan, it's only able to penetrate the shields. And this is an important learning point for the Silver Star. It hasn't faced off against this type of creature before. Luckily for it, it's well over 2 to 3 miles away from the enemy Titan, and so it has the opportunity to circle around. Now, in this case, the Biotitan sees that that is a psychic creature. It's very, very dangerous, but it knows that its allies are right behind it, so it would have no problem transferring forward. In this way, the Silver Star Bastion travels over to the east, allowing the Biotitan to follow it, and then its escorts travel off to the west. The escorts are essentially going to destroy the rest of the Tyranids in this group. It is only around a dozen Carnifexes and around 300 Gaunts. That is easy pickings for the extremely fast-moving Eldar vehicles. Especially with the snipers on board, those Raptor jet bikes have the ability to scout and skirmish at such speeds that the Tyranids don't even have the opportunity to react. Multiple Carnifexes are killed before there's even a chance for the Gaunts to catch up and try to engage with ranged weapons. The Carnifexes never even have a chance. Once the Warwalkers and the Falcon show up, a mix of Psychic Lightning and more Pulsar and Starlance weapons are able to simply destroy the Carnifexes very quickly. While they are fast, they are nowhere close to a match even for the Warwalkers, let alone the Flying Falcons or the Jet Bikes. That only leaves mopping up the Gaunts, which a mix of Swooping Hawks and striking Scorpions will have no problem with. Even a couple hundred Gaunts are really not too much of a challenge for these troops, especially because they have a Farseer with them. Having a Farseer gives them a natural advantage. Not only does the Farseer have the ability to look into the near future in order to identify the location of enemies, the theoretical location of enemy ambushes or locations, etc., or their transit routes, and that sets up for natural ambush points. The fact that they have infinite overwatch in terms of the Jet Bikes and the Warwalkers essentially means that the Tyranids have no chance here. There's so much firepower, and it's moving so much faster than the Tyranids really can on their legs that they don't really have an opportunity. And the further away the Biotitan gets from its supporting group, the weaker and weaker the Synapse becomes, meaning that they become less organized, not more organized, and their plans devolve into being less complicated rather than more complicated, allowing even the escorts of the Silver Star to deal with this group with ease. Now, the Silver Star itself has learned its lesson. It's not about to just deal with this Biotitan using just one Pulsar shot. And while its Pulsar is essentially reloading, it does a couple of things to test. And it knows it has to do this because, well, its pilot is very, very intelligent and knows, of course, that it's probably not the only Biotitan in theater. They would, of course, know this from observation through aircraft. So it tries a couple things. First off, it attempts to use its mounted missiles. Not the best option. The plasma warheads, while they would be effective with a direct hit, are not able to get easy strikes on the weaker parts of the Biotitan. They're mostly able to hit on the back and legs, and while hits to the upper legs and the joints of the legs would likely be able to cripple this creature, it is not able to land a perfect hit, especially at the distance that they're fighting. This Biotitan is running at its absolute top speed and still getting danced around by the Eldar Phantom Titan. And of course, it is trying to use its acid weapons and trying to use its spewer weapons. Unfortunately, it has two big disadvantages. One, the Tyranid Biotitan is not the most intelligent creature, and even though these are Synapse creatures and they are more advanced, they're certainly not advanced enough to understand how a hollow field works. So every time that it tries to get a shot off with the acid spewer shooting way high up into the sky, spraying it like you're trying to water flowers at a great distance, it either falls short, or it hits an area where the hollow field is, and that jigsaw puzzle camouflage simply fractures, and the Phantom Titan is nowhere to be seen, or it has already moved, and the hollow field has once again saved its life. Eventually, the Silver Star gets tired of fucking around, and finishes the creature off with a quick 1-2 punch. The first one is the Vibro Cannon. The Vibro Cannon, used at this distance, roughly a quarter or half mile at this point, as the acid has begun to actually endanger the Titan, so it decides to put an end to its testing period and go right to the finishing kill. The Vibro Cannon shakes the ground when it fires. A massive sonic burst that crushes the jungle around both Titans, flattening it solid to the earth as if it were clear cut, shattering hundreds of trees, and literally pushing the enemy Biotitan back dozens of meters, breaking both of its forward legs backwards. This is essentially a point-blank shot for the Vibro Cannon, and thus the amount of power released scrambles the creature's brain as it literally is struck directly in the face. Both of its legs are broken, its primary weapons are heavily damaged, and as it attempts to regenerate itself slowly, the pulsar is brought to bear once on the crown of its head, and then the barrel is dragged up upwards very quickly by the Silver Star, allowing the next 2 shots in the burst of 3 that the standard pulsar fires to hit the back of the neck, and then the solid center back of the upper torso, just below the hump of the spine. These areas had already been damaged by plasma warheads, which means that a lot of their ablative chitinous armor had been broken through, meaning that the pulsar passes through and through, cutting right through the creature's major organs, snapping its spine in 2 places, and putting it down. All that the Silver Star Bastion has to do is walk over to the thrashing corpse, put one leg on top of one of its feet in order to keep its body low to the ground, and then stomp with the other foot down upon its head, crushing the creature and bringing the first of the 3 sections of the Tyranid army to a very quick and reliable conclusion. Well, while the Titandeath Jungles' first step is a massive success for the Eldar, they lose almost nothing. The only damage is very superficial, and it is to the Silver Star. Most of it is from the ambient acidic damage, and of course the Silver Star, now knowing that this is a threat, is going to attempt to stay as far away from further Biotitan contact as possible. But acidic damage, while dangerous to most vehicles and could theoretically do a lot of damage over time, is not nearly as damaging to Wraithbone as it would be to Adamantium or Steel. Now, Wraithbone in this case is going to be very slow to regenerate because, of course, they don't have the added bonus and effective ability to regenerate that they would have from a Bone Singer, but the Silver Star has plenty of time in order to take back any pitting or residual damage it may get. It does, however, have a further problem. While this has been successful, the dragon ship is now under serious threat. The other 2 splinters, the other 2 Biotitans, are zoning in on that dragon ship, so say the scouts of Alitok. So, there is an initial sighting here. Once the Phantom passes back over the mountains, traveling back to the west again, it has to go past the dragon ship and then engage the other 2 groups. Now, in this case, it is in the very heart of the mountains. This is unfortunately not conducive for its type of combat. It would very much prefer an area where it can skirmish and do what it did with the other Biotitan. Now, while it has no problem fighting in the mountains generally, it does give the enemy a bit of an advantage here. Mostly because the scouts on both sides are not going to be able to directly engage with each other. Now, for the Tyranids, they're traveling in a much smaller, tighter bundle, in a tighter group, through low-lying valleys, heading as evenly as they can, westward to eastward. The Eldar, on the other hand, are facing off with both of these groups, only having 1 Phantom Titan and a very small, fast-moving escort force. And so they're stuck with a little bit of a conundrum. If they deploy entirely, and one of the groups of Tyranids avoids them and goes directly for the dragon ship, it won't have enough defenders to actually defend it, and they will have to essentially abandon the dragon ship, which is not an acceptable option. They cannot lose that vessel because it is likely their only way off planet. Not to mention it has a lot of their support infrastructure and very, very important psychers that the Eldar have aboard. So, a decision has to be made. The Silver Star Bastion travels out alone from the position where it was defending the dragon ship into the mountains in an attempt to find and destroy both Tyranid groups on its own. Should it fail, or should one of the Tyranids avoid it, the rest of its escort force, including the Farseer, stay behind to protect the dragon ship and to provide wide nets of scouting in case they need to call back the Silver Star to defend the dragon ship. Now, the Silver Star is very, very, very aware that it is at a disadvantage here. The enemy has infantry support, they have armored support in the form of the Carnifexes, and they have Titan support, and it is effectively alone. While it's done this as a little bit of a compromise, it still wants to prep itself for success. So it sets itself up once it's found its enemy quarry, and the enemy have of course detected it, upon a high ridgeline overlooking the valleys that the Tyranids like to use for cover. and that's where the battle begins. Again, starting out somewhere around 5 kilometers, the first couple of shots come in. In this case, using the vibro cannon at this range is not really a good option, and yet the Silver Star decides to do so. It fires 2 shots from the vibro cannon down a pair of long glens out in front of it. This flattens the terrain, and it also crushes several outlying sets of rocks and boulders, causing very, very difficult terrain directly in front of it for a couple hundred meters. In addition to this, it fires its pulsar at least twice. In this case, it isn't necessarily firing at the Bio-Titans, though of course that would be a happy advantage to be able to knock out their shields. It is actually firing at the Carnifexes. The goal of this is to slow down this force, to essentially make them cover their heads. And that's exactly what the Tyranids do. The Bio-Titans surge forward, intending to use their combined might to try and take out this Phantom Titan, which they can see, quote-unquote, but with the hollow field, it's very, very difficult for them to identify its exact location on this ridgeline. They don't know if it's 200 meters to the right, 200 meters to the left, further back on the ridge, further forward on the ridge. It's very hard or downright impossible to actually identify its location. Even the shots seem to be coming from different locations every time, so they're not exactly sure what they're facing up against. So, as the Tyranids go to ground, as their smaller units, their armor, etc., slow down and start trying to find cover, they're digging in and trying to travel through that loose terrain that the Silver Star has made. This slows them down, but it also makes them very easy pickings for the mounted missiles on the Silver Star. It immediately begins the dance with these, essentially ripple firing dozens of different unguided and guided rockets directly at these smaller Tyranid creatures. This causes not only sympathetic quote-unquote detonations from the hillsides, hitting larger upsides of rocks and the sides of valleys, intentionally collapsing large avalanches of stone down on top of the Tyranids, but also directly impacts several Carnifexes with plasma warheads, detonating them and destroying them instantly. While it has effectively stymied, slowed down, and prevented the infantry from fighting against it, it has so far not managed to do much to the actual Bio-Titans, and they are able to close to within a kilometer without much damage. This results in a very, very dangerous knife fight scenario. Now, the Silver Star Bastion has several advantages still. Of course, it was able to dispatch of a single Bio-Titan very easily, but it can't afford to get knocked down or bogged down here, meaning that it needs to split its focus at least a little bit. In this case, at 1 kilometer, it splits its primary weapons. The Pulsar is fired directly at the Bio-Titan on the right, intending to aim directly for one of those joints on its forward legs, and the Vibro Cannon is aimed at the one on the left, intending to collapse it, hopefully breaking its frontal legs as well. There's unfortunately a little bit too much shielding for it to achieve exactly either. It does get rather lucky, however. For the shot with the Pulsar, it penetrates through the shield, but rather than hitting the frontal joint, it hits the back joint. So it snaps the backwards knee of that Bio-Titan, causing that rear leg to drag, and the creature begins to have to pull itself forward on 3 legs as the last leg attempts to regenerate. This slows it down dramatically, but not nearly as much damage is dealt to it as the one on the left. The Vibro Cannon, while a sonic weapon and losing significant killing power over distance, it's also an all-around damaging weapon. It's a cone, effectively, which means that it collapses the psychic shield way more dramatically. And in this case, it forces the body of the Bio-Titan upward as the shield is cracked, pushing its head backwards and exposing its underbelly, specifically exposing the 2 barrels to its acid spewer guns. These are both shattered by the massive overpressure wave of the Vibro Cannon. Therefore, the one on the left has its primary range weapons disabled, but it is still mobile, and the one on the right is slowed down, but still has its primary ranged. Both Bio-Titans are given the opportunity to charge. One much slower than the other. The one on the left, the one that has lost its range weapons, has no other option than to try and close directly with the Silver Star Bastion. It does its best. It sprints directly at the hollow field, spreading out its legs as wide as it possibly can, coming on like that massive green creature in Star Wars, attempting to almost envelop or hug the Eldar Titan with its weight and with its acidic bulk. Remember, it is still spewing out masses of acidic smog, and its intent now is to hold onto the Eldar Titan and try and grip it and literally melt it while the other Bio Titan tries to destroy it with ranged weaponry. Unfortunately for the Bio Titan, the Silver Star is still very much being defended by the hollow field. This means that as the Titan charges, it's just a little bit off to the right, and as the forward leg comes into contact with the Titan's shins, the Phantom Titan kicks forward. Now, while the knee of the Bio Titan is not designed like a human knee, it's not designed to, just crack if it goes backward, it's also not designed to take a direct kick from this powerful of a creature and just take it lying down. The entire limb snaps sideways, and the shoulder joint rips about 2 feet clear of the creature's body, flopping onto the ground and causing the entire belly of this monster to drop downward and its broken guns to melt into the ground. Now, the Silver Star is taking significant damage from acid at this point. It's been completely surrounded by 2 of these creatures. Each of them is spraying acid in wide arcs, or, in the case of the one that's had its acid cannons destroyed, producing acid at a very close range, and that is damaging its weaponry and damaging its frontal armor. This is unacceptable. They need to put a quick end to this as quickly as they possibly can. So, in order to rapidly finish off the Titan that has been crippled, it steps directly onto its back, ignoring the fact that one of its legs crushes into the creature's upper back and torso, essentially using it as a step, crunching into it and getting completely doused in acid. The foot of this creature is now literally melting. The foot of the Phantom Titan is melting as it's pushed it into the acidic production chambers of the Bio Titan. However, stamping directly down on this thing has the same effect as stamping on a cockroach. It essentially flails, rips at the creature, can't turn its legs backward, and dies. The 3-legged one that still has 2 guns, however, opens fire directly at the Phantom Titan, and it has no hollow field to defend it at this range. And the spray is very, very direct. It takes a shot straight to one of its shoulders, and it pours down across its chest, the acidic drool gripping and sticking to the center of the Phantom Titan's torso, and even worse than that, the 2 remaining frontal legs on the other Bio Titan, the one that's not being actively stepped on, get the opportunity to reach out and immobilize the pulsar arm. The pulsar arm is grabbed by the very tip of the weapon and wrenched sideways, preventing the primary anti-tank weapon from being brought to bear at this range. However, this creature has still lost one of its back legs, meaning that it can't rear up and grab with its other leg. It attempts to snap at the other arm with its massive mandible-like claws, and it gets a good grab. It manages to hook onto the vibro cannon arm and grab at it and attempt to start to crack through the housing of the weapon, but as it does so, as the weapon is literally over the creature's head, it's grabbing at the underarm with its mouth mandibles and continuing to try and spray with its acid weapons. The vibro cannon is activated, and a point-blank shot is fired directly into the upper back and spine of the Bio Titan. This rips the entire back half of the Titan clear from its entire body. The mandibles continue to hold on, the synaptic power of this creature continuing even though it is literally being torn in half by sonic waves. But the Phantom has managed to kill both of them, no question. Now, Silver Star Bastion is suffering. It is forced to withdraw immediately from the field. It has received significant acidic damage. It was unable to essentially avoid getting a direct shot to the shoulder and chest, but it is still operational. Even with 1 foot, it is able to limp its way home slowly back to the dragon ship. It's going to take a significant amount of time before the Silver Star can be deployed again, but it has done its job. It has managed to execute all 3 Biotitans and decimate almost all of the secondary Tyranid forces. Of the Tyranids that managed to survive, only a handful of Carnifexes and a couple hundred Gaunts actually come clear of that battlefield. Most of them spend the rest of the conflict just consuming the body of the other Biotitans. This is both to conserve their biomass, but also to try and generate some psychic resonance in order to reorganize themselves. But we will talk about that in the epilogue. So, Titandeath Jungle. On to Mardrug. Now, Mardrug's a much smaller force, originally only 8,000 orcs, now significantly fewer. His light box trenches that he organized at the end of the last video are rapidly overrun. They weren't really designed to hold in the first place, and they're only holding about 1,000 of his troops. Prefect shotguns, and especially the heavy poisonous dart rounds, are able to overcome most of his boys and kill a majority of his grots. The primary weapons for the Indigan Prefects may be shotguns, and while some officers have las guns or other longer range weapons, they also have specialized ammunition for these shotguns. This includes dart rounds, which are these heavy armor-piercing rounds with an invested plastic tip filled with poison. Is a very venomous and deadly neurotoxin. In addition to that, they also have flechette rounds and buckshot. Flechette, if you don't know, very effective at killing both grots and severely injuring boys, with multiple shots being significantly lethal, especially if you hit in the face area. Flechettes are like tiny arrows, essentially, in a small group that shoot out rather inaccurately, but in a spread similar to birdshot, but far more lethal, and able to carry through more cover. In addition to the ground forces that are coming in the mechanized force and the ground force of the Indigan Prefects, the few light vehicles that they have, basically those small wedge-shaped las cannon carriers, begin bombarding the kill cruiser from the ridgeline. The upper ridgeline is pretty well fortified with vehicle bunkers and a couple of sets of trenches, and the orcs really can't suppress these vehicles because they are relatively well armored. Now, the guardsmen have a very simple goal. They want to make sure that if the orcs are trying to repair that kill cruiser, the las cannons are going to be able to disable it. Hopefully, they're hoping for catastrophic damage. They're really hoping to hit something like a central engine block or a fuel thing, essentially to light it on fire in some way so that the orcs won't be able to easily deal with it and then be able to fix it. But there's a couple of problems with this plan, because Mardrug is a very smart blood axe. He knew that those trenches were probably not going to hold, and that the Indigans were probably going to focus on the wrong target, assuming that the kill cruiser was still going to be of use, or that the orcs wanted to leave at all. He has no intention of leaving. His goal is to be successful. Now, his reserve, quote-unquote, emerges. These are essentially the orcs who were behind the kill cruiser or in the set of bunkers off to the side where their mech boys have been working. The guards are stuck inside of these low, wide trenches, and they almost become like killing fields in a very rapid period of time. Mardrug's blood axes are equipped with almost as many shootas, and of course heavy shootas and other things of that kind, sluggas, etc., as they are choppas. And in this case, being more shooty than choppy is being a very big advantage for them, because they now have the artificial high ground. As the guardsmen are clearing out these wide trenches, defiles, or depressions, the orcs keep appearing over the breastworks from the rear side of them, and being able to clear out the trenches with ranged weapons rather easily. Now, at longer range, the Indigan Prefect's armor would give them a significant advantage against the orcs, especially against their sluggers, and possibly even against shooters as well. But at point-blank range, at trench fighting range, a lot of the heavy caliber orc rounds are still lethal, even to the heavily armored assault troops of the Prefects, simply because of kinetic force, impact, or rate of fire. This flips the momentum, with the attack from both sides being able to collapse in on the guard, forcing them back out of the trenches, and then being able to retake the trenches and continuing to push them back, hopefully to keep them at the ridgeline. But that isn't the end of the story here, and it's not the thing that breaks the camel's back either, as of course many of the guardsmen are killed, but many more orcs are slain in this attack. The thing that really puts an end to it is Mardrug himself. His goal hasn't been to get his ship reoperational again. No. The reason that he's been monkeying around with the ship and having his mech boys look at the weapons and equipment is he's been trying to reactivate one of the really large shock attack guns on the upper hull of the vessel. And they aren't able to do it. The orcs are not able to move this massive gun around and transfer it in a way that it can be aimed downward at the troops. They simply aren't big and strong enough to move this heavy barrel. So, as the fight is going on and Margrug realizes that it's now or never, he absolutely does a war boss king move, and he frees the weapon himself, using his physical power as a war boss to push the massive barrel of the weapon just far enough that he can angle it at the ridgeline. And he holds it there, with one hand on his power claw and the other one forcing itself into the metal as he uses his axe to support his elbow and almost deadlifts the weight over and off so that the mech boys on the gun's controls can fire at the ridgeline. The shock attack gun whirs up to speed, and it fires a massive raking burst directly at the ridge, crushing several vehicles and destroying a massive section of the wall, literally blasting apart several rock trenches and raining them down on top of the Indigan prefects who had been trying to climb up the few available egress points to try and get some cover from the orcs. Now, while it's a heroic effort, and it is undoubtedly effective at breaking the guards' morale and showing that the orcs still have an even bigger gun left in their trump box pile, it does draw fire. In this case, las cannon fire. Two of the light las cannon carrier vehicles from the ridgeline aim directly at Margrug's position and fire two very precise shots. One shoots directly through the housing of the shock attack gun, breaking through the bearing that Margrug was using as a support beam in order to aim the weapon and dropping the barrel down. It is far too heavy for him to carry on his own, even though he was able to push it sideways, and it crushes down on top of him, holding him in place. The other orcs scramble to try and grab and help him, but they're not able to get there in time. The second las cannon shot goes right through both of his legs, shearing them off at the upper thighs and dropping him off the side of the kill cruiser in a free fall. He hits the ground with a massive smacking sound, his back muscles explode, several bones crack and shatter, and his legs spurt blood as they've both been completely removed by las cannon fire. So, that is the end for all of our forces. Let's go through a quick epilogue. Finally, the Inquisitor is forced to make a decision here. If he wants any cooperation and any chance of getting off this world in one piece with his dignity intact, he's got to decide what to do with this Farseer, Arayan. He decides on a handover. It's not the most glamorous thing. It's not the best option. It certainly isn't what he wanted, because the opportunity to have a captive Farseer is far better than having to turn her back over. But if it's a choice between trying to fight the Eldar, who just defeated the Tyranids, and swallowing a little bit of humble pie, which basically everyone on the planet would thank him for, he has no choice but to give up the ghost. So, rather than SMS-5 carrying all of its Eldar troops and its various Eldar civilians coming across outlying Indigan prefect bands or troops, they come across Arion. Arion is left on a single outpost with a couple of troops who immediately withdraw upon sighting SMS-5, and the Farseer is reunited with her craft world once more. With that completed, the Eldar retreat, finally heading back to their dragon ship with their required objective completed and with no longer having a Titan to truly make the statement that they wanted to. Now, while the Bastion is definitely going to be able to be repaired, there's no point waiting around for the Imperials to call on reinforcements if it might mean the loss of a Titan and the dragon ship, not to mention 2 Farseers. So, the Eldar are satisfied, and the Imperials are saved from one enemy who already saved them from another in the terms of the Tyranid Bio-Titans. Mardrug's death, however, is very unfortunate. Having lost both of his legs, a large amount of his internal body pressure and organs falling off the side of the kill cruiser, he is unable to sustain himself, and even the med boy, the doc, on his warband is not able to fix him in time. This results in a major diaspora for the Blood Axes. While the skirmishing troops for the prefects immediately break, heading back northwards, having been recalled along with their survival mining structures, the orcs don't know that. And as they spread out, no longer having a war boss, they're not going to be able to organize themselves for any type of attack anytime soon. In addition to that, they come over the great glory that is Indiga's natural wildlife. The dangerous and deadly creatures pose not only an opportunity, but also a threat to the organization of the orcs, and they're forced to take on that problem rather than focus on dealing with the humies. Plus, there's plenty of good fighting out in the jungle that the humies don't have to be involved in. The Tyranid remnants and the Indigan prefects essentially awake in the next couple of days to a fresh hell on this already hellish world. There are two forces that still remain, granted in degraded cases. The Tyranids, in very small numbers, but of course in dangerously escalating ones, as the Tyranids often do, have only a few of their actual constructs left. They've made some breeding pools out of the corpses of the original Biotitans, and of course out of their original Green Valley type hidden biogenerators, which were part of their vessel, but they're still not in apocalyptic numbers, and they too are having to deal with the problem of, without carnifexes, and without warriors, and without the large synapse creatures, they're still falling prey to the local fauna and flora of Indiga just as often as they are able to capture them. Now, of course, the Indigan wildlife is not at all able to just eat Tyranid flesh with no consequences, but a bunch of Tyranids getting destroyed in a hunt for something like a Megaraptor is not really a sustainable practice. So their rate of growth is slow. The orcs as well, for the same reason, is slow. But slow does not mean non-existent. And non-existent is what the Guard would very much prefer this threat is, because, as per the astropathic messages from the rest of the Imperium, the likely timeline for reinforcement from the rest of the Empire for this dangerous event is 3 months. In 3+ months, the Tyranids and the Orcs are going to be ready for another fight, and that could likely mean that Indiga is in for one hell of a long haul. So, with that said, credit for this video goes to GW, Carl Kopaniskini, Ayla Tereshkanen, Rookie 12, Pedro Nunez, David Astaroga, David Gallagher, Aguileras, Alex Pierce Boquin, along with the other artists from previous videos. I hope that you guys enjoyed. We have a couple of changes now. This is our very last Adversaries video, as you might have expected, and we're going to change a little bit of the series. I know I had mentioned discontinuing it entirely because they're not the most popular videos. They take a very long time and a lot of effort to create. I know the people that watch them enjoy them, but I will say that I expect them to be a little bit more watchable in future. Here's the change that I intend to make, both to make it more functional for you guys and for you to see more of what you want. There's going to be 2 votes now, and then the rest of it is going to be handled by our Discord, which everyone is free to join. Of course, it is in the description. The first vote on the channel is going to be for who fights who in this set of adversaries. Now, this can be what factions are fighting. It can also be what forces from other universes are fighting. So, for example, the vote will look like this. Who is fighting in our next adversary series? Warhammer versus Warhammer? Warhammer versus Star Wars, Warhammer versus, let's say, Helldivers, for example, and then Warhammer versus X, essentially custom one, make your own. So that's going to be the first one. We decide who is fighting who for this adversaries. And then the second vote is going to be on how big the series is. There's basically going to be 3 different types. You can either have an individual duel.
which is going to be essentially one video where we compare an individual person or an individual squad fighting against another one in a fairly simplistic but realistic scenario. Say, a group of 4 Helldivers against a squad of Imperial Guardsmen. Or we could do something much more unique. You could say a squad of Harlequins, or a single Harlequin, fighting up against a squad of 10 Clone Troopers, for example. Anything that you guys would like is essentially going to be what I do in the comments. Where I can't find something or there aren't any suggestions on the comment or on the vote, it will go to our Discord. That's the smaller side. That's really only going to be one adversary's video. Now, on the larger side, you're going to have full campaigns. That's essentially where we have large armies in realistic scenarios fighting faction against faction. Now, if this is 40k versus 40k, we're going to do the more unique stuff, of course. You know, it might be Leagues of Votann versus Tau. It might be Mechanicus versus Necrons. Well, that's a relatively common one. Let's say Mechanicus versus Imperial Guard, or Mechanicus versus Astromil, or against the Adeptus Astartes, something of that nature. So it's going to be a lot of, like, who, consider if, or, what if scenarios there, but it's also going to be size-wise. Do you want an individual one-on-one duel? Do you want a squad battle? Or do you want a more narrative-focused campaign? The reason I'm doing this is because the overall requests for adversaries have been tone down the numbers, increase the crunchy details on the storytelling side, and increase the amount of narrative focus rather than just basic line, or, well, not necessarily basic lines on maps, but like, the basic platitudes of, like, this is cool, and this is fighting, and here's where they are, and that's where, focusing more on the story, telling the details, and then going in, like I did for this video, on the gory thrust and punch of the actual conflict, and trying to make it even and fair. Now, I've had a lot of thought about how to do that correctly, and I think the best way to do it is to format it more like this video. So if you want to look at what it might look like in future, this is going to be a good example. If you like this, tell me so in the comments. If you don't like this, if you don't like the pivot, if you want adversaries to go away entirely or change its format entirely, or if you have an idea for a change to it in future, absolutely perfect. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking about for the moment. There will be more videos in future. For example, I'm already working on the Demagogue, arming a Demagogue and their bodyguard videos. That's going to be a very, very primo one. I have lots of different format stuff for that. It's going to be very fun, lots of chaos stuff in that. And then, of course, we have the very end of our D&D campaign. I will also say there's already plans for the next one. I hope that that doesn't bother anyone, that I'm doing that as more of a variety channel thing. It will, of course, be more watchable. I have plans to make it more watchable, but some people already know about it, and I will give you more information as that series comes out. I hope to start it by about the 20th of this month. Whew, with all that housekeeping taken care of, I really hope that you enjoyed, and I wish you all a lovely good night.